It's time to gain some business skills to stabilize, secure, and grow your distilling business. Give yourself the edge to go further with the spirits industry-focused knowledge in finance, marketing, and operations from the University of Louisville's online Distilled Spirits Business Certificate. This is the perfect solution for anyone looking for more professional development, and if you ever want to get your MBA, their certificate credits transfer into U of L's online MBA program as elective hours. You can learn more about this online 6-course certificate at ufl.me/bourbon pursuit. There's a new 4-grain bourbon that's been taking the market by storm, Penelope Bourbon. Bottled at the historic Castle and Key Distillery, Penelope's balanced 4-grain flavor comes from a unique blend of 3 bourbon mash bills. Currently available in 2 expressions, 80 proof and cask strength, Penelope sips well neat, but also makes a great Kentucky mule. So, look for Penelope's award-winning bourbons in select markets, and of course, online at penelopebourbon.com. Are you looking for an app to track your tasting notes and bottles, but also connect with other bourbon drinkers? The Oak Bottle Tasting app uses powerful analytics to suggest new spirits for you based on your reviews and the tasting notes that you enjoy. Explore the feed to like and comment on the tastings of your friends, distilleries, and verified tasters. With over 250 different tasting notes, recording your own tastings has never been easier or more accurate. Join the fastest growing community of tasters today. Search for Oak Bottle app on the Apple App Store.
That whole thing was based on tourism. And I really do think that, tourism is forever changed, at least for 5 years, which is forever in whiskey.
Yeah, exactly.
This is episode 274 of Bourbon Pursuit, the podcast featuring news, reviews, and interviews with people making the bourbon whiskey industry happen. Before we start today's podcast talking about sourced whiskey, here's your weekly bourbon news update. On Friday, October 9th of 2020, the world's largest private whiskey collection ever will go up for auction. Only going by the name of Pat's overall whiskey collection consists of over 9,000 bottles of bourbon and American whiskey, along with 2,000 miniatures. With many rare bottlings such as Old Fitzgerald's from the Van Winkle era, almost 100 bottles of Jack Daniel's including the Sinatra Century, Old No. 7 Inaugural, and the Gold Medal series, and noteworthy collections of Very Old St. Nick, Willett Family Estates, and Rare Michters, and nearly every bottle of the Buffalo Trace Experimental series to the coveted 1974 Van Winkle exports. Bidding will open on Friday, October 9th and will end on Monday, October 19th. More details about how to register for the auction are available right now at whiskeyauctioneer.com. Now moving on to bourbon release news. For the first time ever, Angel's Envy cask strength will hit the shelves in all 50 states. It's the only time each year that the brand releases its flagship port wine barrel finished bourbon at any other proof than its classic 86.6. And this year's release will be 120.6 proof. About 17,400 bottles of this 2020 cask strength expression will hit shelves across the country starting on November 1st, and a limited amount will be available at Angel's Envy Downtown Distillery in Louisville, with a suggested retail price of around $200. Pinhook has announced the Bourbon War Vertical Series 5-year, the second release in the Bourbon War line, which follows a group of barrels that age from 4 to 12 years old. The bourbons for this line were distilled at MGP and are blended and aged at Castle and Key. The Pinhook Bourbon War Vertical Series 5-year will be available in the upcoming weeks for a suggested retail price of around $50. Chattanooga Whiskey announced its release of its Vote Whiskey Single Barrel Bourbon, commemorating its history of its original 2012 Vote Whiskey campaign, which you might have heard a time or two when we talked to these guys on the podcast. After nearly 2 years of legal efforts, House Bill 102, appropriately nicknamed the Whiskey Bill, was signed into law by the governor, and distilling whiskey in Chattanooga was officially legal again after a century. The barrels are from MGP, they are 12 years old, and one barrel will be released every week at barrel proof for $125 a bottle. They are available online, and you can pick up at the distillery at chatwhiskeytogo.com. Woodford Reserve is coming out with its new Woodford Reserve Baccarat Edition. This exclusive whiskey of Woodford Reserve bourbon has been aged an additional 3 years in XO cognac casks from France. It is bottled in a handmade crystal decanter that took 5 days to create in Baccarat, France. The bottle design is meant to evoke the iconic Woodford Reserve bottle silhouette and is engraved in gold with Woodford Reserve's and Baccarat's iconic logos. It's presented in a signature Baccarat red box and includes a crystal stopper adorned with Woodford Reserve's initials. The Woodford Baccarat is available at 90.4 proof and will retail for $2,000. Wild Turkey Distillery is introducing Russell's Reserve 2003. This time, it's aged for 16 years inside of Tyrone warehouses, and this will mark the very last of Russell's Reserve 107 barrel entry proof whiskey. Bottled at barrel strength, which is only 89.5 proof, there will be approximately 3,600 bottles of Russell Reserve 2003 available at select retailers across the U.S. for a suggested retail price of $250. The Van Winkle 2020 release is around the corner, and Buffalo Trace has come out with a statement. They said that while the amount of 10, 12, and 15-year bourbons will be about the same as previous years, it's unfortunately that the 20 and 23-year-old barrels yielded far fewer bottles this fall. The good news is that there is more 13-year rye than in years past. And the SRP has also crept up just slightly this year, with the 10-year being $70, 12-year at $80, 13-year rye and the 15-year bourbon at $120, and the 20 at $200, and finally the 23 at $300. Good luck on the hunt. So, for today's podcast, what is sourced whiskey? Well, it can mean a lot of different things, and to some of us bourbon geeks who also feel that some do it more right than others. There's contract distillation, and there's others that are just outright buying barrels, but it's what you're doing with them that really makes the story. We evaluate some of the most iconic brands that have built their legacy off of sourcing, and then we look at today's market and to see who is doing something unique and special versus somebody that's simply just slapping a label on the bottle. Are you interested to know more about supporting the podcast and our private barrel program? We've updated our website so you can get all your questions answered. Go to bourbonpursuit.com and click on the Barrel Club link in the menu. And have you checked out Joe's playlist? No, I'm not talking about something on Spotify, but it's a collection of small releases available exclusively online from Barrel Craft Spirits. Right now, there's a private selection of rum and a single barrel rye available. You can get them now by going to barrelbourbon.com and clicking the Buy Now button. With that, enjoy today's episode, and here's Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. Did you know that if you buy a bottle of rye whiskey, and if it doesn't say the word straight on there, there could be flavoring added? Did you know that when you buy scotch, there's a good chance that the color of it actually comes from coloring? Did you know that when you buy rum, depending on which brand it is, there could be up to 50 grams per milliliter of sugar? There are all kinds of shenanigans that go on when it comes to producing spirits. You don't have to look too much further than vodka, which is coming off the still at no lower than 190 proof, the same proof point as ethanol, by the way. And they cut it with water and they put glycerin in it. And in fact, you can find that there are three core vodka distillers: Cargill, MGP, and ADM, and they basically sell in bulk to the rest of the world, and they redistill it and call it their own, whether it's Russia or somebody in Texas. That's what's going on in spirits all the time, and that's why bourbon is so special. Bourbon is so protected. It is so concise in how it can be produced, and it will not change unless we let off of what the meaning of bourbon is. Over the years, I have really enjoyed the the barrel finish programs that, the likes of Angel's Envy and Woodford Reserve, really everybody is doing. You take the bourbon and you finish it in a port barrel, a cognac barrel, a rum barrel, an additional toasted barrel, whatever it may be. You take it and you finish it in all these things. And it's absolutely fantastic. The whiskey is sublime. I dare say it's some of the best stuff that's out there. However, you can put that bourbon in there with a little bit of port in there already, or a little bit of sherry in there to keep the barrel wet. And it's the same thing as almost as adding flavoring. And here we are, we're considering these products to be the same as bourbon, when in fact they are not. And when they go to apply for a federal label, they have to do so under the distilled spirits specialty. So, I love barrel finishes. I think they are great, but I do not think we should be considering them bourbon. Now, when I did my best bourbons of the century so far, a lot of people asked me, why wasn't I considering barrel finishes? So there you go, folks. That is why. Is because while I love them, while I think they're wonderful products, they are not bourbon. They are whiskeys from a distilled spirit specialty category. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you have an idea for Above the Char, hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, even YouTube. Just search for my name, Fred Minnick. Until next week, cheers.
And we're back with another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon. The whole trio here today and talking about what is sourced whiskey. Now, we talk about this because we look at what's on the shelves today, and, we've all heard of the conglomerates of MGP, and we've all heard about, big things like that. However, it was really funny when we were getting ready to start recording this. I go over to my bar and I start pulling bottles off. I'm like, holy dear Lord, I think like half the bottles on my bar are all sourced whiskey. Like they all come from different places. Now, whether they do different things, whether they have different aging techniques, finishing techniques, whether they just say like, hell, that's just good whiskey, we're just going to bottle it up. Everybody takes a different approach to this. And so there's definitely a good amount of ways we can take this conversation. And I know, Fred and Ryan, you have both had conversations with other people about this same exact topic in years past.
Yeah, in fact, you actually were on my show, The Curation Desk, and we were talking about it.
That's right. I forgot about that.
So we've, Ryan and I, we have a deep history in the discussion of sourced whiskey.
We're very well schooled in sourced whiskey, and hell, we do it. Us two, we're in the sourced whiskey game. So
it is. I mean, but it's not like we're breaking new ground.
No.
We're definitely, we're following in the footsteps of people that have been doing this for generations in front of us. And we'll probably talk about this later on of, when you start talking about, like the sommeliers of bourbon and like, oh yeah, that can't be a thing because you don't know where bourbon barrels are actually coming from. It's all this crazily traded paper that's always hidden.
Yeah.
It's nothing's public information. It's not public record. So
That's right.
It's just something that's kind of like an inside little trading distribution.
And I'm so
game.
glad you started there, Kenny, because what people see when they go into a liquor store, they see a brand. They don't know the amount of shit that happens, behind closed doors with these brands. I mean, even the brands that have their own distilleries trade whiskey amongst one another. So I guarantee you, if you were to break through the paperwork between Jim Beam and Brown-Forman, you would find some barrels passing back and forth here and there. Hey, I'm short on some 6-year-old. Can you hook me up? Hey, we need a little bit of this. Can you help us out there? I need some GNS. Well, you know what? You need that GNS. We need about 100 barrels of like 4-year-old bourbon. But the thing is like this whole conversation, we're having an American whiskey. It's kind of a new conversation that's kind of coming to the forefront, and it's not celebrated. And by the way, historically, the distillers have never celebrated being sourced. It's always happened in America, but in the United Kingdom, they celebrate it. They call themselves merchant bottlers. They're almost like hunters. They're out there trying to find like the best whiskey out there. And, in American whiskey, it's like, oh yeah, we're sourced whiskey. And it's like, it's...
I always find it ironic, like the people that make it are like, oh, we make it, not those sources, but they're happy to sell it to people. It's like, oh, how the irony,
Yeah, if you ever want to find irony, just, talk to a whiskey distiller. They're very ironic. When it's time to sell, they need the money, they need the cash, they've got it. But then if it wins an award, well, it was really ours. That was really our liquid.
Yeah. They totally discount who put it together, who blended the barrels and all, tasted through them and whatnot.
But, so in my eyes, there are 3 layers of what we would call source whiskey. And by the way, this is not anything that has been defined previously. Prior, go back into the 1930s and 1940s, they didn't have this term source whiskey. They were just barrels that were bought on what they called wholesale receipts. So someone would buy like the receipts of the barrels, and then they would bottle them. And it was in the trade, it was called like buying bourbon on wholesale. And that's what it was called. You know, in the modern age, we've called it source whiskey. It's a more proper term, I think, especially now that we see that consumers are more connected to whiskey than ever before. They want to learn about it. It's kind of become like the sports for some people. It's entertaining. It's fun.
Yeah, because they're like, who's the source?
Yeah.
Who's the source? Where can you tell me where it is?
Where'd you get that from? What's the mash bill? What warehouse? Was it center cut or was it on the edge? You know? So, I mean, it's a little bit, it's
on the northwest side.
Yeah. What hill's that on? Oh, well, okay. What wind was it coming on that day?
That day was the east side.
So, you know, there are three parts to it. There's the source whiskey where someone is just buying and bottling. All right. So that is just like a basic kind of sourcing. Then there's the sourcing where someone is buying and they're doing something to it, whether they're blending it or they're finishing it. They're changing, you know, the makeup of that liquid by doing something else with it. The best example we could possibly come up with is barrel, which is like getting liquid from all over the world and blending and doing stuff together. Like, you know, you want to say what you want about source whiskey. What barrel is doing is unique and different, and ain't nobody got a candle to them in terms of like how they are changing the whiskey after it comes from the distillery. The third type, and this is what like, you know, Michter's and Heaven Hill did for a very long time, and that's contract distilling. And that is that they would use someone else's facilities and give them their recipe, their yeast, and they would, you know, make their own unique products. And, you know, Joe Mayoko, you know, famously says that, you know, he's like borrowing someone else's kitchen to make dinner, is basically how he put it, until he could have his own kitchen. And so in my opinion, that is basically the three layers of sourced whiskey. And nothing wrong with any of those, as long as you're as transparent as you can possibly be. Now, if you're an asshole and you want to say like, well, this actually came from my grandpa's recipe back in 1902, it just happens to be the exact same as the one in Indiana,
Yeah.
you know, then you're a dick.
Or I'm a new brand and I got 12-year whiskey, you know, just
Yeah,
been hanging on to it for 12 years.
Yeah, be like, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a lot of it is like, is the language on the label. When you say it's a distillery, you know, if you try to say it was distilled here, but you kind of pass it off as your own, I mean, that's a different conversation. That's of like, you know, you're trying to deceive the consumer that you created it. That's what it comes down to, really.
Yeah, it's even funny. You can read a label now and like where it says bottled at or distilled or bottled, where it says it's bottled at, you can really like pinpoint where it's actually bottled at. Like if it's a brand that hasn't been around that's bottling at Bardstown, you know that it's probably Strong Spirits. Or, you know, if it's someone in, you know, Louisville, Kentucky, it's probably the guys up there in Crestwood, you know,
Right.
contract bottling. So,
But of course, these are things that you know, and those are things that, you know, people inside the trade understand. But that young woman going in to buy a bottle of bourbon for the first time,
going to buy a nice Christmas gift or something.
exactly, that is, you know, or she's drinking it herself or whatever. You know, I mean, they're going in there and their only connection to the brand is the label. And it's the same in wine. You know, wine has they have a profession called the negociant. The negociant is someone who's celebrated. I mean, they're like they're in some respects they're like the heroes of the wine industry, and that they like go and buy like bulk wine or like small pallets of wine, and they'll put labels on it, and it's like, and people look for certain negociants and they'll look for certain importers because they're like, oh my God, that's the best wine. That's the best like blend I've ever had. So I'm going to keep looking for that. So I think like bourbon, if we start looking at source whiskey as like, if we look at like barrel as the champion, you know, like they're like the pinnacle of what you can become in source whiskey, which they've won a lot of awards. They do a great job, and they they make everything that they do very, very unique. If we look at them as like the pinnacle, and people start going toward that model, man, source whiskey could be as celebrated as negociants in the wine world, and merchant bottling in Scotland. Instead, we get, you know, class action lawsuits.
And I think one thing that we should also recognize, and I'm guilty of this myself. So when I started getting into whiskey, and I mean, like really got into it, I mean, I had this notion of like, like not distilled here, don't care.
Yep.
Right. And I was just like, okay, well, I now know how to read labels, and I understand when something is sourced and when it's not sourced. And I was on a tear and a tangent for a solid year and a half of like, I'm not going to buy anything that's a sourced whiskey.
Yeah, I was down that same path too.
And then I think I don't know when it became clear to me that it's okay. It's okay to have sourced whiskey.
Maybe when you started your own brand.
Well,
no,
I mean, that was a clear indicator.
But no, it's like, like Old Scout's a great example. Like, or OKI, like I just immediately dismissed them because I'm like, it's just MGP, it's like, it's just MGP, and you're like, they're just sourcing, and you totally dismiss them, and then you actually go somewhere and taste, and you're like, holy shit, I shouldn't have dismissed it,
But I mean, maybe that's a good place to start on. Like, let's look at something that is, a bottle that is a high aged MGP, and these are companies that are buying barrels, but they're not doing anything special with it, right? I mean, they are bottling as single barrels, they're bottling as maybe flagship offerings, yet they're not doing anything that is like, oh, let's make sure we blend this, or we finish in this.
Like mic drop.
Yeah, I mean, anything like that. I mean, it's literally just like, hey, we bought barrels.
We bought a lot of 12-year-old MGP.
And 7-year rye, like whatever it is, and we'll just sell it. Right, because we're not doing anything special.
And I would actually say that's more special to me than finishing it in another port barrel and turning it to shit. So I think that there's something to be said for the people who have the ability to know whiskey and just and bottle it as is instead of doing a finish. Like what you all are doing with Pursuit series. You're not doing anything to it.
Oh no! And like I said, we've always been very forth that we're still working on our blending techniques and everything like that to come out with new products and things like that. But we have the opportunity to actually go and select single barrels, right? We get to go and select the best of the best that we have of that day versus saying like, oh, here's a check for $50,000. I hope what shows up on the truck is good today.
Yeah. And most people don't know that about sourcing. You go and say you want to start a brand, you get with a broker, and then you're like, I want 100 barrels of X, whatever. And they're like, can I get a sample? And you'll get a sample that's a representation of the lot. But you don't know, some of those barrels may show up empty. Some of them may suck. Some of them may be full. You just don't know. And so it's like you just blindly give them money and hope what you get's like you can turn something, useful out of it.
Yeah. And that's the broker market. That's MGP. I mean, that's a lot of places. That's the way this world works. And it's super high risk and everything like that. And so with a lot of these whiskeys and things that we're looking in front of us, I mean, a lot of these people were put in high risk situations, and they probably have the bankroll, the capital to say like, okay, like we'll take a gamble on 300 barrels, and maybe we sell a quarter of those as single barrels, and we take whatever percentage and we roll that into another product line.
I also think that it's a little bit different, with every brand. Like let's take a look at Whistle Pig over here. Whistle Pig had Dave Pickerel behind it. And Dave Pickerel makes 2 phone calls. He's not getting an empty barrel, And so like if you have like a brand that is connected to an icon like that, then you're probably going to be okay. And let's take a look at Kentucky Al. Kentucky Al has, Dixon Deadman behind it. And he's not really, 10 years ago, a lot of people in the consumer world didn't know about him, but
10. I mean, I think the first Kentucky Al batch release was like 2014,
right?
So I mean,
so
but he was buying whiskey before then. So
but he's like a insider, where he's like, hey, you know what, guy who manages Warehouse Z, I'm looking to start a whiskey. Can you help me? He's not calling Chris Morris and saying, "Hey, we met at this convention 5 years ago.
Sell me some barrels.
Can you help me out and sell me some barrels?" So I think there is also a little bit of like, and by the way, Old Carter was connected to Kentucky Al, so a lot of that kind of same network is going to be very, very different than say Old Scout. And then you have a source whiskey like a Bullet, which has the buying power of Diageo. It says, you know what, we've got this $15 million check over here for some contract distillation. Are you interested?
You got it. How soon would you like it? Yeah.
And then, of course, you got something like Willet, which Willet, of course, they're doing their own distilling now, but they were doing this in the 1980s, like acquiring stocks from distillers that were just trying. They were
in the bourbon glut.
Yeah, like, they were going in and plucking stuff, and then people would say like, "Wow, you did a really good job with that whiskey." So they kind of get like this like first right of refusal on like
right place, right time,
good barrels that are up in the market. So like I think we have to like also like every single one of these are going to be different. So like by the time you get to a broker, you got to know that, there's probably about 5 people that aren't connected to a broker that have already turned down that whiskey before it gets there. And that's another little layer of the whole whiskey conversation that people don't really know about. But every one of these bottles has a different story in terms of how the whiskey got there. And some of it, man, is great whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deny the fact that, as I mentioned, there's nothing new about source whiskey. I mean, even Pappy Van Winkle was doing source whiskey, right? I mean, like even something like that back in the day, even should I say the brand today, you have the brand, and then you've got we got Buffalo Trace, you had Old Stitzel Weller stock. I mean, you had all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and you had those old medley ryes from those early rye editions.
Gosh, I can remember. I think there's even like rumors of like the 13-year, which was probably even older than that, was even coming from like Wild Turkey. Right. I mean, like there's rumors of things that go on about inside the source world of people want to try to figure out where they come from. And so I think there's a good baseline to, at least for myself, to kind of understand that there's nothing wrong with source whiskey, and I think that kind of goes into the next phase of this. And I think this also goes back into, we've talked about this on the podcast before of, even Sazerac buying early times and making still time for Old Forester, for Brown-Forman. Why would a company like Heaven Hill, like Brown-Forman, like these companies, why would they want to sit there and get rid of product?
Well, cash flow to a business is everything. And so, bourbon's a capital intensive, and you have to have age time. So you're looking at minimum for 4 to 6 years to get a return on investment. So if you got some projects you want to do and you need cash up front, it's a great way to offload some either age stock or new make, just to get a check right up front, so you can go ahead and reinvest into your business. Whereas otherwise, yes, they're more valuable down the road, but I guess the distillers see 4 to 6 years, there's some opportunity costs we're giving up by hanging on to it that long, whereas we can invest back in the distillery and get the money now to where we think later we can make even more money down the road versus sitting on those barrels 4 to 6, bottling them at a higher margin. So that's what I think. Well, and two, I forget this too. Like, so I know one distillery in particular, the way they set up their arrangements with, their distributors was, a distributor could say, hey, 5 years from now, I expect to sell this many cases of your flagship brand. And so they will go and prepay for the barrels at new make cost. And then, so they'll buy them at, say, $800-900 a barrel. Well, they sit and age. The distillery gets the cash up front, but they sit and age, and then they have the opportunity to, go ahead and bottle. They've made some margin there for themselves, a distributor. The distillery got cash up front. The distributor is making more margin on the end because they prepaid for those. And then, but they can also decide, hey, I'm not going to bottle these because I think I can make more money on the source market. Mm-hmm. So they get a broker involved. In 5 years, they're like, we can make so much more money selling it to a source brand versus bottling these up and selling them as a standard offering. So that goes on in the industry too.
That's when we raise our hand and be like, we're in.
Yeah, we're in. The bad part about us, we're so small. We get, like Fred said, we're on the scraps. It's already been denied or turned down a few times.
I didn't mean to put it that way, but it's true actually. And one of the best stories about this whole thing is Orphan Barrel. Orphan Barrel's the Diageo series that came out, and it got that name because nobody wanted those barrels. Like, they were putting them out on the market and trying to sell them to people, and everybody kept turning them down. And the person who came up with the concept gave this whole story of how, like, they were all turned down and nobody wanted them, so they were orphans. And so that's kind of how it came to be. And they spun that to be like, well, they were lost and whatever. But the fact is that, there's so much that goes on in these companies that not even like sometimes the master distillers don't even know, you know?
Yeah, it's a weird business because you're like you're investing capital like in product now. So say you're a source brand, you got to invest capital now to get juice that you can sell now. But you're also investing in the future, taking cash and getting new make or contract distillation for someone. So you're investing capital for now, but you're also investing capital for the future and trying to project how that demand's going to be there in 4 to 6 years. And nobody 4 to 6 years ago would even think that they would be here today. You know, it's like I've talked to many, distillers that are making their own juice, and their projections 4 to 6 years ago, they're like, we were dumbasses. We should have, we should have just cranked this baby on and just let it run full time. But at the time, you just don't know, and it's like, so you got to invest all this capital now to know 4 to 6 years what the demand may or may not be. And so, and that works both ways. So like, the whiskey glut, in the 60s, 70s, whatever, you had so much interest in 50s and 60s, you had so much interest in American whiskey, but then it stopped and they had so much excess stock that they just hung on to them and aged them. And then they weren't selling. So they're essentially worthless. I've heard of people buying Stitzel Weller juice or, H&H juice. They would buy truckloads of it for $600 to $800 a barrel and then refill a barrel with it, So it's like, wait a minute, you're buying 20-year-old aged juice for $600 a barrel, and then you're filling barrels with it, whereas a 20-year-old barrel might have 180 to 100 bottles in it. So it works both ways, and I'm interested to see, because we're in this period where every distillery is making so much juice right now and stocking away. It's like, what is going to happen in 5 years? Like, is the demand going to meet all the, the production?
I think that the crystal ball kind of got broken a little bit with the times, no one saw a pandemic coming, but you definitely, right now is a great time to have a source whiskey business plan. Because all these people who have invested $60 million in their stills and their warehouses, they're like, holy mother of shit.
It's very true. Very true. I mean, everybody's kind of scrambling at the moment to be able to take care of that. But we all kind of look at the future of what this is. And we've seen the reports from Drizzly. We've seen the reports from other people that are in the industry, and nobody's slowing down, right?
No.
Like it's
speeding up at the retail level. But the model is changing in the tourism side too, which is a component that wasn't there in the 60s and 70s. That's changed, and it's like, and I think the success of bourbon in the future really rests on the success of the economy. But what we've seen is people pivot and price their stuff out less, including the source brands. I'm noticing a price drop in source whiskey. And that's going to be very, very interesting, because that's the one flaw that source whiskey has, is that you have to price it more to make money because you don't own the assets. And so you have to invest in the assets and you have to get your money out of it. And so you price a bottle that really should be $40, $85.
Yeah. Cause essentially what a distillery does is they will sell their aged product at what they would bottle it to or sell it to a distributor. They're selling that to a wholesaler, and so they're not really losing any money or margin on it. That's the way it is right now. Now 5-6 years ago, it was a lot less than that, but now it's like they can get the cash up front and they're making the same amount of margin as they would,
and they don't
if they were bottling it themselves.
There's no bottling cost, there's no marketing cost, there's no label cost, there's no any of that stuff that's built into it, right? So they're sitting pretty at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess that kind of goes into the next kind of question when we start looking at, the types of bottles that are, I just lost my train of thought now.
The types of bottles that move and people get excited about?
Well, I guess, I don't know where I was going with it, to be honest with you, but sorry, Lauren, we'll cut that part out.
No, it's okay.
Leave it in, Lauren.
It's a live podcast. No. Yeah, I mean, with all these brands you're looking at, as Fred was talking about, I mean, there are such different strategies and ways to go about it. You got someone like Old Scout who built it off MGP, but now they're trying to transition to their own and trying to find that transition. Whereas you got someone with barrel, they're like, well, why would we ever invest in a distillery when we can just keep buying from the source market, which is continuing to grow because you have so much more competition now, whereas it was MGP, Four Roses and Heaven Hill were mostly doing contract distilling 10 years ago. And now you got Barstow Bourbon Company, you got Castle and Key, you got, even independent craft distillers starting to do contract distilling for other brands. And so,
I mean, we interviewed Trey of Jefferson's, right? And remember, because he's got his thing down in Crestwood, and he said, it's actually a lot easier just to buy in the source market than it is to build my own distillery and try to make my own whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, I've had many people tell me that it may not be true now, but probably when Trey started and others started, that yes, it was much more cost effective to just source it versus, and I think we're probably getting back to that with the, all the distillate from Barstow Bourbon Company coming of age and all.
I also think that people like Trey, though, they're a step ahead of people because they're creative and they know they have a vision for their whiskey. I think a lot of people get into this and you can tell like they didn't have a vision, and so Trey's never been one to say, I'm just going to bottle my own stuff. And whether you like it or not, the Jefferson's Ocean is arguably the most creative thing anyone's ever done in American whiskey. I mean, it's incredibly creative from a production perspective. Whether or not you like it or you think the marketing of it is accurate, that's inconsequential. The fact is like he actually puts it out on a boat and there's real creativity there. And he's done some finishes. He's just like, I don't want the whiskey to just be like the whiskey. He's like, I want to do something different with it. And so that kind of creativity is applied at barrel. It's applied. I'm just going down the list here. Let's put Joseph Magnus applied that. Angel's Envy applied that. So I think the people who have kind of came into the source whiskey category have also made a huge influence on whiskey. I mean, the barrel finish movement, which I do love. I just don't think it should be labeled as bourbon. I love barrel finishes. That whole category gave a beautiful lifeline to American whiskey. It showed like an entirely different level of complexity in a lot of different ways.
You have the source guys to thank for that.
Exactly.
Woodford was doing a little, aging, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it'd be widely.
It wouldn't be like it is now.
Yeah.
But Booker Noe was the guy who kind of like put a stamp on it in the 1990s with the Jim Beam's Masterpiece, or I can't remember what they call it. I think it was Masterpiece. And the fact is that if it wasn't for source whiskey purveyors trying to stand out differently, you would not see these barrel finishes. You just wouldn't. So if you like sherry, if you like port, if you like these wine finishes, thank a sourced whiskey maker like Bellamede, like their sherry finish.
Oh, speaking of that, man, I had that honey barrel. Oh my gosh, I was blown away.
It's so good.
I know.
Right?
I was like so skeptical going in. Once again, I'm like, oh, it's just MGP source putting a honey barrel. Like how? I mean, real.
They're literally a honey barrel.
Holy shit, it was good. I mean,
it's good.
It's so floral, got such great like fruity honey notes. I mean, man, it was delicious. Belmead is doing a great job. We don't have a bottle of them up here, but it's another brand that
Actually, I have one in the back. I probably should have grabbed it.
That I probably unrightfully dismissed because I was like, oh, it's just another group of guys sourcing MGP, throwing in a bottle. But then you like taste what they're doing, and then you realize there are differences with their product versus others.
But I want to kind of like get you all back in a good headspace here, because when you all had that kind of cynicism towards the source whiskey market, you had every right to do so, because people were not following the rules of whiskey labeling, and they were trying to pass the stuff off as their own. There is no reason whatsoever that Templeton Rye should have been passing off Indiana Rye as their own, with their own backstory. And they got sued for it. And that with a few others, that really hurt the whole movement. And so
did it hurt or help though?
It hurt. Like, you all are coming in here like, it hurt
Well, okay.
It did not hurt the business.
Probably helped us to make sure that we don't fuck up and say oh yeah.
I see what you mean.
We probably shouldn't say stuff like that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
It's like a necessary evil
From that
so where
perspective.
people wouldn't do it again.
But from my perspective is that they messed up because that stuff these laws had been on the books since the 1930s. So they put the state of distillation on the federal code in the 1930s because at the time, coming out of Prohibition, you had all of these distilleries going into like one pot to be batched out, and they didn't call it small batch, and they would call it like a blend of straights, which is still very much in play today. But it's like they would have blend of straights, and it would be from like 5 different distilleries because that was the only place that they could get liquid that would hold up to their taste standards. And so they're saying like, okay, if you have a whiskey, you need to put the state of distillation on there because the consumer has a right to know if it's from Missouri and not Kentucky. And that's really what it came down to. And so like that, everybody had been following that label after label after label. And then you get into like 2006 to 2008 and people are like, well, hey, we got our own liquid here. We got a backstory. We don't need to tell anybody it's not from here. It's ours. It's the recipe, by God. And of course,
we inherited a recipe. Is that what it goes to?
We inherited a 6-year-old recipe that just magically appeared out of this little bitty pot. But so look, it kind of like it worked itself out, and
Yeah, and I mean, you talk about the 30s. I mean, there's some major brands that were started as source brands. I mean, Heaven Hill's one of them, Brown-Forman, and you just don't know that. And it's like, what I'll ask this question to you, Fred. Like, what's more respectable, starting a brand sourced and then transitioning to your own distillate, or just starting from distillate and trying to ride that wave?
To enjoy whiskey, all one has to do is drink it. But to understand and experience whiskey, one must participate in its creation. And for over 20 years, the Thousand Oaks Barrel Company has been supplying kits to do just that, including personalized oak barrels, ranging from 1 to 20 liters in size to custom age your own spirits or cocktails. But they now have their newest kit called the Whiskey Experience. And this complete kit allows you to make, age, and taste your own whiskey. The whole package comes with a new American white oak barrel that's 1 or 2 liters in size and includes everything that you need to make 10 different styles of whiskey from around the world, including American whiskey, Irish, Scottish, Japanese, and Canadian. So, are you ready to take the journey? Visit 1000oaksbarrel.com, which is number 1000oaksbarrel.com, and use code BP2020 to get 10% off your very own Whiskey Experience kit. Let's take a second and talk about ice balls versus ice cubes. It's all about physics with volume and surface area. Did you know that an ice ball has 24% less surface area compared to the same volume of ice in its own cube form? Well, less surface area exposed to warm liquid means a slower ice melt and less drink dilution without sacrificing any chilling power. And the coolest way to make any ice ball is with the Meltdown Ice Ball Press. First, you'd make some ice and some provided silicone cups. Then you take that ice and you put it in a Meltdown and watch as the conduction from the copper or aluminum melts the ice right in front of you. You can literally see the melted water cascade down the sides. And in a minute, you've got a perfect ice ball to put in your drink. Meltdown. It's the perfect solution to dilution pollution. Check it out now at meltdownice.com. Well, bourbon season is here and the holidays are just around the corner. So whether you're looking for a perfect gift or innovative products to complement your bourbon, Aged Noir has you covered. The Duo Glass is an item Food & Wine says if you're a true whiskey lover, you need this glass. It has integrated measuring, nests a standard ice ball perfectly, and comes in premium gift packaging. And after being sold out for months, their popular travel decanter is now back in stock. Visit agedandor.com today to see their entire product offering.
What's more respectable, starting a brand sourced and then transitioning to your own distillate, or just starting from distillate and trying to ride that wave?
That's a good question.
I think it depends on who you ask. From my perspective, it's like, where are you in 20, 30 years? Because it takes a lot of capital
I think it's more of a financial decision, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I mean, we've interviewed people, and they come from a background where they don't have to rely on the outside capital, or they don't have to rely on sourcing to make that happen, and they can sit there and they can experiment and they can fail, and they can say like, well, if we don't come out with a whiskey in 6 years, it's okay. Like we've got the money to make it happen. On the other side of it, there's people that are like, listen, like we've got investors, like we product up front, we make a little bit of money coming in, and we'll eventually blend it together and we'll blend it out, whatever it is. I mean, for me, it's a financial decision. I mean, I think that's a tough one.
Corky Taylor of Peerless is the best example that I can give of someone who had the capital, came in, distilled it, did everything that you want people to like. We made it ourselves. We barreled it ourselves. This is all us, no source whatsoever. And the minute that their bottle came out, they got trashed. They got trashed, I would say, more in the whiskey community than Templeton did. Why? Because they were $99 coming out of the gate. And the people were like, yeah, dare you charge that much? I can get Heaven Hill for this. Well, you know what? I mean, this guy just invested, I want to say $30 million or whatever, of his own money. I mean, good for him for having however many millions of dollars there to do that. I mean, that's awesome. We all hope as business owners to have that sort of thing. But like, and he just gets trashed, and it's like, but they're making it themselves. And so like I think it's like what we have now is we have a consumer base that's very engaged and will always, comment one way or another. And, Peerless is an example of they did every, if you go to the book of like what we say is like the right way to do it is to do a distillery, they still get criticized because their bottle was actually priced in a way that they can maybe actually recoup some of that investment, that they had put in there. Then you have someone like, I don't know, let's give me a source.
Well, let's say like Willett for, you say Peerless had, they came out at a 2-year rye, $99. Like Willett's first rye, I remember in the 2 to 3 year range was probably like $39.
Yeah.
It was way more affordable, way more, and it was their own distillate. They invested probably similar amounts of money, but they had those years of sourcing to help fund that. But
and also, I think Willett's very smart about how they price their.
I feel like they've made the transition better than anyone. Going from a source product to their own distillate, it's been very well received. And
I would put Chattanooga. I mean, it's in a different category, but I would put Chattanooga in there as like making a good transition.
Well, theirs is like so off. That was I agree, the whiskey that they're selling, but it's so off profile from what they were selling. Like it's not to say that's a bad thing. I do love their malted product. It's weird because you're like, you got someone like Old Scouts trying to like replicate what they had and try to blend it out to try to blend it in. Then you got someone like Chattanooga's like, well, nope, we're going a totally different direction. And then you got someone like Willett who has 6 different recipes. They can blend together a few different ones to get certain things, or they can, highlight different ones for just certain brands, and they can showcase like their rye or their, wheated bourbon or the high rye mash bill. They can, whereas I don't know, it's funny how they all just kind of approach it differently.
Well, another one that, we're looking at a bottle right here and from Luxco. Luxco, man, we were there for the Hall of Fame speech of when, Don was getting inducted. And one of the things that he basically just used the moment as like a
or he was inducting from Heaven Hill. He was inducting Max.
He was spending the moment of basically using it as a moment to roast Max Shapiro.
That was great. He was like, I didn't know Friends should like really upcharge people more than like the open market.
And he's like, I had to build a distillery because you stopped selling me whiskey.
Yeah.
And so you had someone who built like a 30, 40-year-old model on the whole source concept. And he's like, fine, I'll build a fucking distillery, asshole.
You finally cornered me into it.
And then his like, he does everything is like, he creates a visitor center and he has this video. It's like, this is corn. This is a still. We used to source whiskey. Now we make it. So it's like he's to me like Luxco is like one of the greatest examples of how the business has shifted, because Don Lux never in a million years wanted to build a distillery. He wanted to like keep doing
Sign
what he's
check,
doing.
send me aged whiskey.
But he had some friggin' prominent brands. Ezra Brooks, man. I mean, that's like Ezra Brooks is in there, and that
Rebel
kind of
Yell,
like,
Stitzel Weller brand,
yeah. I mean, he has some brands, and so it's like, what's he going to do? Is he just going to stop? Is he going to like go and pay more for the barrels? No, he's like, fine. I'm at the end of the rope of sourcing. It's time to build a distillery, and
I mean, for a consumer, I think that's like the next wild card. Because as a consumer, if you're like, hey, I like the current former Bullet, I like Rebel Yell, I like some of these brands that are, in Ezra Brooks, I like these brands that are built off of source whiskey, and they've now been cut off. Mm-hmm. And so we are going to see a profile change here, and maybe even Angel's Envy sits in the same exact position as well. We don't really know that, but we're going to see some of these brands get cut off from their sources relatively soon because they now have their own distilleries. They've got to kind of shape their own future to figure out how do they keep these brands going, because at some point these other brands that we're sourcing realize like, oh shit, we'd rather hold on to this stuff.
Yeah.
And so as a consumer, do you look at this and say like, okay, well, maybe we buy an extra bottle or two when we find something we want? Or is it saying like, let's go ahead and hope for the best in the future?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I would probably, if you really like something like Rebel Yell 10, I mean, that's probably going to be going away pretty soon. I mean, I don't know how the extent of the contract with Heaven Hill, but I can't imagine that, within the past 5 years that they've been, buying as much as they had been, the previous 5 years. And so,
because they just came online, what, like 2 years ago?
Right,
something like that?
Exactly.
They're distilling,
and, and with Bullet, I mean, everyone knows it's, whatever, but
that's right. Bullet was long made.
The only thing I would say Bullet might have an advantage over somebody like Luxro is they have whiskey making pedigree, like just they have such a monster feeding the beast to like. I mean, they got some great people working on that to like really dial it in, tune it in. Whereas someone like Old Scout or Luxro or, I'm just looking at these like Traverse, they're just getting into distilling. This is not like, they don't have hundreds of years.
Yeah, let's give some perspective here. When the CEO of Diageo or the CMO or CFO calls, a brown foreman person for contract distilling, they're going to the top. When someone from like, let's say the Pursuit series, once they call someone a brown
that's
foreman,
a very good person to call out.
Yeah, we go straight to voicemail.
I mean, Diageo, when they call with those big old checks, people answer. So Bullet's going to
too. They can hire like fine. The big talent. They got people in there that are they got Nicole Austin down at Dickel. They got Ebony, doing the blending. I mean, she's fantastic. I mean, they got like these pedigree people that know what they're doing, that have earned their stripes, done the work that can help make that transition a little easier than some brands that just, they're like, it'd be like me and you, Kenny, we're like, hell, we're going to start a distillery and here we go. It's like,
we won't,
but could you imagine trying to transition from a source liquid that's so good to like your own thing and like, you're just trying to figure out as you go,
Well, and it's an experimentation. You don't know until years down the line if what you were doing was right, or if the stills were dialed in. I mean, you don't have the Dave Pickrell here to come and help you move through that, right? You got to rely on somebody else. So,
and there's been so many brands that have just failed, and they failed, and it's not a good model. I mean, it's not a good model if you're starting from scratch. I mean, I really do believe in like if you are coming into the business, you need to choose. I don't believe in the strategy of sourcing to get attention to your product and then putting your own stuff out. Like I know what Smooth Ambler's doing, but that is not like a formula I would have ever recommended to them. I think I just think it's a losing proproposition.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people that follow that formula too. I mean, like the Blom brothers. I mean, there's a lot of people that follow that formula, and they just had really good old source whiskey, and it got money rolling through the door. But it's really hard to sit there and try to take either your own product or source a new product and try to fill that mold when you run out of that good old product.
Let me edit that comment in that what I mean by is on the brand. Like, so if you are going to, like, the way that New Riff did it.
Oh,
right?
clean cut.
Yeah.
It was OKI and then it was New Riff. That is how you do it if you're going from source whiskey to your branding. They did it perfectly. I don't think anyone did it better than New Riff. And I know we talked about Willet and everything, but I actually do think that New Riff has kind of set the bar for how to do it, because they're like, fuck you, OKI. We're so done with you. You're gone.
They literally sold the brand. They literally sold the brand.
Yeah. I mean,
we don't need you anymore.
You're like, you were done. This is New Riff.
Thanks
time.
for what you did, but see you later.
That poor little OKI. It was good whiskey, but
It was.
I mean, the way they did it is like, if you're just a basic consumer, you don't have a drop off.
Yeah.
You know, if you got your sweet tooth on OKI, you're not going back to it. You're like, oh man, I missed it. Oh, New Riff made. Oh, that's how they did it. Oh, okay, cool.
One person I want to keep my eye on is Kentucky Al in Dixon. You know, that he was in that like kind of magic period where, you know, bourbon was just kind of getting traction, but there was still like contract distillation. He was able to score some like great barrels, and I still think they even have some, but like at some point those got to run out too. And I know he's got a big, you know, buyers behind him, but just don't think there's the inventory that he's used to having to play around with. And so some of that stuff's got to be running out soon, to where, you know, there's not going to be like 17-year-old whiskey in those blends. You know, there's not going to be 15, 17, 20-year-old whiskey in those blends. It's like he's got to work with some younger type products. So
well, you noticed it in the last couple of releases.
I have total faith in Dix. I mean, everything they've put out's been fantastic. So, but like, you know, we're looking at Rye Batch 1. I mean, gosh, that was...
I know it's so close to me. That cork might be coming off and get that last little drip out.
But I'd be interested to pick his brain. Like, all right, what are you working with now compared to what you were working with, you know, batches 1 through 9 or 10 or whatever?
Are they going to build that distillery?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I don't know. That's purely speculation. But I mean, I know that they're contract distilling, and it's like, it's a...
Like, why would you, you know, if you're contract distilling at Barstow Bourbon Company and you've got loads and loads of that, you know, at your disposal,
and the prices,
why would you build a pyramid?
And that whole thing was based on tourism. And I really do think that, like, you know, tourism is forever changed, at least for 5 years, which is forever in whiskey.
Yeah, exactly.
Or if you start now, at least you have a product.
But, you know, it's a sweet spot for, you know, a brand like Kentucky Out, because they have so much capital at the money they're able to spend. I mean, they can get the price per barrel down to where it's damn near close to what you would be making it for yourself if you invested all the money, you know, yourself, you know, whereas...
And therein is the
where
argument.
Barstow Bourbon Company's happy to make, you know, a cash up front, get that small margin now, and then we'll get them on the aging fees and all this, you know, and then you times that by 50 clients, you know, you got a great business model.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You know, you bring up, you know, Stoli, which is the parent company, Kentucky Owl. You know, it's fascinating to see this because it's really their first experiment in American whiskey. They're a vodka company, and like all that capital and everything they're able to do and what they're trying to do with it is through like the lens of Russia in a lot of ways. So, although Stoli's not necessarily a Russian company anymore, but.
Well, and Ryan, you also brought up a pretty good point, and I think that people also need to realize is when you look at price points, I mean, we are not going to see the end of source whiskey coming in the market. There's going to be a new one almost every other week for the longest time because, you know, if you ever want to know like what's in the market and people are all like, oh, what's this little 12-year-old stuff? What's this 6-year-old stuff? Like, it's not hard to pinpoint what's out there. Like, it's very, very easy to kind of know what's coming in the market. And so there's going to be new labels coming all the time. And then people are always getting pissed and like, why is this $100 a bottle?
Yeah, I mean, just because we're in the source market, we know that there's probably 4 to 5, you know, not even that many, probably 2 to 3 sources where it's legitimately can come from these days. And there might be a one-off that's, you know, that's rare, but it's very, very rare and gets scooped up immediately.
Barton, Dickel, and MGP. And then actually a lot of the smaller distillers are starting to put stuff out on the market, like Cedar Ridge in Iowa put a bunch of like their single malt out there. And
and then you got people like Bardstown Bourbon Company's starting to get 3 to 4 years. You got OZ Tyler, same situation.
Every once in a while, you go to the ADI forums, and people are just like trying to sell totes of stuff.
Right.
Hey, can I get rid of my over oaked rye? Anybody want?
It happens. It happens. I mean, 18-year-old Kentucky whiskey, it comes on the market in
Yeah, and that's
huge ass totes.
and because of the aged 1 year in Kentucky law, I mean, it's really made it advantageous for investors to
Explain that for the listeners that don't know.
So say I'm a source company in Iowa, but I want my bourbon to be, say, made in Kentucky. It has to age in a barrel a year and a day in Kentucky, and so it has to.
It also has to be mashed and distilled here.
Sure, absolutely, but you can't just have it made there that day,
Yeah.
ship it to your facility, and age it there. So investors, will come in and just buy up, lots of Kentucky bourbon at Bardstown Bourbon Company or OZ Tyler, and as soon as it turns year, it immediately goes from a $600 investment to a $1,200 investment.
Yeah.
Because you can now buy it, transfer it to your location, age it however long you want to, and it can still say aged in Kentucky.
By the way, that law is on the books because Diageo was trying to send liquid from George Dickel down here to call it Kentucky bourbon.
Oh, wow.
See?
Yeah.
Things we didn't know about
I didn't
before.
know. That would be it. I don't know.
There was a
I'm
big
kind of 50-50 on that law. I like the law because I think it, helps keep Kentucky bourbon here, but it also like artificially inflates the price of the barrels. And
I mean,
so,
at that point, I kind of feel like if you were even to take it even in a year and a day and you age it 6 years in Tennessee or North Carolina or Minnesota, it doesn't really matter. Like, why wouldn't you just say it's just aged in Minnesota? Like Kentucky whiskey aged in Minnesota.
What if we had a whiskey that was aged
but
in every one of the states?
But I mean, hell, how hard was it for us to sell stuff that we think's really good, probably better than any Kentucky product on the source market? And it was at first hard to convince people, even though it's one state below in Tennessee, which is has history in Tennessee in whiskey making. It's just has KY, it sells.
It's true. It's true.
And so that's why you got that badge of honor.
This whole conversation has got me to like wanting to get a barrel, and Trey, you're probably the only person out there that would actually do this, and that is like take a barrel and put it in every one of the states and say it's aged in all 50 states.
Ooh.
That's a J
United
Miller.
States of America bourbon right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that he would be the guy to do it.
Yeah,
He's probably got an RV or something.
he's
could
probably
ride around.
already doing it.
Oh, yeah. For sure. It's just going in semi trailers, around to each.
Dumping one in every
It's got
state.
a tracker on it.
Yeah.
It's going across Northwest today.
And then he has to put it on a boat to take it down to Hawaii.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Doesn't sound too bad. Yeah. Oh, Alaska. That's kind of far. So as we kind of start wrapping this up a little bit, I mean, I think we hit on a lot of good points at Source Whiskey. Honestly, I don't think this will be the last conversation we have about Source Whiskey.
It could never end.
I think we covered it all, but not in a fluid way. We kind of jumped around.
we were
everywhere, but I mean, there's.
But we knew that
so
coming
interesting,
in.
yeah.
We knew that coming in because there's a lot of passion there on the table. There's also a lot of idiocy when it comes to sourced whiskey and people like trying to take advantage of consumer bases. And that's what it comes down to is like the reason why it was a dirty word when you guys were getting into the game is because people are trying to take advantage of consumers. And as long as you're transparent, do not take advantage of consumers.
Yeah.
Do not be fraudulent. Just be honest and be as transparent as you can be.
And there's, because bourbon's so hot, there's a lot of people that have money that are just starting brands trying to capitalize that, and they can just buy some 12-year-old whiskey and put it in a bottle and and that's, that's part of it too. So
And
it's like you got to really be behind the company that's doing it and know who's blending it, who's tasting it. If you trust them, then it's probably going to be a good product. And there's nothing wrong with source whiskey.
And we're talking about whiskey-centric brands, okay? So everything that's on this table here has touched a whiskey-centric person. The brands like what Bob Dylan's putting out, Metallica's putting out, those are to base on the fans of those respective properties, and the bands are properties. They're brands. The bands are brands, and as the music world gets more connected and more into this scene, the more I fear that it's going to go wrong, and more of that kind of like, this is our story, we etched this bottle just this way and it looks like this and it looks like that, and
It'll go into the glass.
yeah,
It'll go into the glass like, oh yeah, it's shaped like a guitar.
And it's like now that we're gonna have a whole new layer of sourced whiskey, and it's like,
Yeah,
great, your bottles in gold.
One
Fuck
pet
you.
peeve of mine is the stories behind sourced whiskey. You're like, you don't need a story. Just say like, we like bourbon and we're passionate about it, and we think these are really good, and we put them together for you.
But so we've been in this game for a minute. Every one of those people who are on that other side, it's new for them.
Sure.
And so they're looking at all this other stuff like, how can we be different? Okay, our whiskey sucks and it looks like it tastes like everything else. So package, all right.
Yep. And not to just like belittle anything, but everybody that thinks they can just get into source whiskey, make sure you go check out the past episode of How We Built Pursuit series where Fred actually interviewed us. It's not the easiest thing to get going either. So just make sure that you understand if you want to get into this game, there's a lot of hurdles to jump through.
And a lot of money.
Yes, a lot of money.
It definitely is a part of it. So guys, I want to say awesome episode today talking about source whiskey. I think we're going to re-hit this one again in the future because there's a lot of things we didn't talk about, like, hey, what's the best way to market one? Do you feel like it's better than maybe something that comes from somebody that's already distilled it? So there's a lot of places that we can go with this. So I want to say thank you again for everybody tuning in. Make sure you follow us on all the social medias, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everywhere. And support us on Patreon, patreon.com/Bourbon
I
Pursuit.
think that's the first time he's dropped TikTok on the closeout.
He drops it in there.
been
He
a
loves
while. It's been a while.
TikTok
It's been a
because he's the only one on there.
Who knows? Who knows? Maybe we get one today.
No, I joined TikTok.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I haven't been on it since I joined it, but I joined it.
See,
There you go.
just count another number to it.
Yep.
All right. Cheers, y'all. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Toodles.